The old elevator in the Riverside Music Academy creaked and groaned as it carried Maria Santos and her mother to the top floor every morning at 6. 8-year-old Maria pressed her small face against the cold metal doors, listening to the faint sounds of piano music that sometimes drifted through the building's walls. Her mother Carmen clutched her cleaning supplies tighter, worried they might be late again. "Mia, remember what I told you," Carmen whispered as they stepped out onto the polished marble floor. "Stay quiet, stay close, and don't touch anything." Maria nodded, her worn sneakers squeaking against the gleaming surface. The academy was like stepping into another world. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, and oil paintings of famous composers stared down at them with serious faces. Everything smelled like expensive wood polish and fresh flowers that someone replaced every few days. Carmen had been cleaning the academy for 3 years now, ever since Maria's father left them with nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. The job barely paid enough for their tiny apartment above the corner grocery store, but it was steady work. And it came with an unexpected gift that Carmen hadn't planned on. It gave Maria a front-row seat to a world of music she could never afford to enter. "Mrs. Santos, you're 10 minutes late again." The sharp voice belonged to Mrs. Patterson, the academy's assistant director. She stood in the hallway with her arms crossed, looking down at them over her reading glasses. "The practice room's on? The second floor need extra attention today. We have important visitors coming this afternoon." "Yes, ma'am." "Sorry, ma'am." "The bus was running behind schedule," Carmen replied, keeping her eyes down. Maria watched her mother's shoulders tense the way they always did when someone spoke to her like that. As Carmen started her work, Maria settled into her usual spot, a small wooden chair in the corner of the main hallway. She pulled out her homework and tried to focus on her math problems. But the sounds around her were far more interesting than multiplication tables. From practice room A came the sweet notes of a violin. Someone was playing the same melody over and over, getting a little better each time. Through the door of practice room B, Maria could hear a boy her age struggling with piano scales. His teacher kept stopping him and making him start again. No, Timothy, your left hand is too heavy. Think of touching butterfly wings, not hammering nails." But it was the grand piano in the main recital hall that truly captured Maria's attention. When the older students practiced on it, the music seemed to fill every corner of the building. The piano was black and shiny, so perfect it looked like it belonged in a palace. Maria had never seen anything so beautiful. During lunch break, when most of the students went to the cafeteria, Maria would creep closer to the recital hall. She would sit on the floor outside the doors, pressing her ear against the cool wood to hear better. Sometimes she would close her eyes and imagine her fingers dancing across those keys, creating the magic she heard every day. One particular afternoon, a teenage girl named Isabella was practicing a piece that made Maria's heart skip. The music started soft and gentle, like raindrops on leaves, then grew stronger and more powerful, like a thunderstorm building over the mountains. Maria found herself holding her breath, afraid that even breathing might disturb the beauty floating through the air. When Isabella finished, Maria whispered, "Wow," before she could stop herself. The practice room went quiet for a moment, then Isabella's voice called out, "Hello, is someone there?" Maria scrambled back to her chair, pretending to work on her homework as Isabella peeked out into the hallway. The older girl looked around, shrugged, and went back to her practice. "What was that beautiful music?" Maria asked her mother later. As they rode the creaky elevator down, Carmen smiled for the first time that day. "That was classical music, Mia. Some of the most beautiful music ever written. Who wrote it? Great composers from long ago? Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin. They lived in different countries and spoke different languages, but their music speaks to everyone." That night in their small apartment, Maria couldn't stop thinking about the music. She hummed the melody Isabella had been practicing while she helped her mother fold laundry. She hummed it while brushing her teeth and getting ready for bed. "Mama," she said as Carmen tucked her in, "do you think I could ever learn to play like that?" Carmen's face grew sad for a moment. Piano lessons cost more money than they spent on groceries in a month. The students at the academy came from families who could afford not just lessons, but expensive instruments, fancy clothes for recitals, and trips to competitions in other cities. "Music is a beautiful dream, Mia," Carmen said carefully. Some dreams cost more than we can afford. But what if I could learn without lessons? What if I could teach myself?" Carmen kissed her daughter's forehead. "You have such a big imagination. Now sleep. Tomorrow is another long day." But Maria couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the city outside her window. Car horns and sirens couldn't drown out the melodies playing in her head. She imagined sitting at that grand piano, her fingers finding the right keys, creating the same beautiful sounds that made her heart feel like it might burst with joy. The next morning at the academy, Maria watched everything more carefully. She noticed how the piano students held their hands, how they pressed the keys, how they read the black marks on the white pages. She saw how their feet touched special pedals underneath the piano, and how their faces changed when they played, sometimes concentrating hard, sometimes closing their eyes and smiling during her lunch break. While Carmen cleaned the practice rooms, Maria discovered something wonderful. On the music stand of one piano, someone had left behind a beginner's book. The pages were filled with simple songs and explanations about which fingers to use for which keys. Maria looked around to make sure no one was watching, then carefully turned the pages. The book showed pictures of hands on a keyboard with numbers over each finger. It explained that the thumb was number 1, the pointer finger was number 2, and so on. There were easy songs with notes that looked like little circles on 5 lines. She memorized as much as she could before quickly putting the book back exactly where she found it. That night, she drew a pretend piano keyboard on a piece of cardboard, marking where each letter-named key belonged. She practiced pressing the cardboard keys with the right fingers, humming the simple melodies from the book. Day after day, Maria's secret education continued. She absorbed everything she could from watching, listening, and quick glances at forgotten sheet music. Her cardboard piano became worn from practice, but her understanding of music grew stronger. She began to notice patterns in the music she heard. Some pieces made her feel happy and light, like dancing in sunshine. Others made her feel mysterious and dramatic, like walking through a dark forest. The music was like a language she was slowly beginning to understand, word by word, phrase by phrase. Carmen noticed her daughter's growing fascination, but said nothing. She had seen the spark in Maria's eyes when music played, the way her small body swayed with the rhythms, the way she hummed melodies days after hearing them. Part of her heart broke knowing she couldn't give her daughter what she clearly loved so much, but another part of her heart filled with pride at Maria's determination and natural understanding of something so beautiful. As weeks turned into months, Maria's secret dream grew stronger. Every day at the academy was like attending a free concert and masterclass combined. She was learning from the best teachers and most talented students in the city. Even if they didn't know they were teaching her. Little did she know that her greatest test and her greatest opportunity were just around the corner. 3 weeks had passed since Maria discovered the beginner's piano book, and her cardboard keyboard was falling apart from constant use. The corners were bent, and some of the drawn keys had smudged from her eager fingers pressing them over and over. But it wasn't enough anymore. The melodies in her head were getting stronger, more complex, and she needed to hear real notes, not just imagine them. It was a Thursday evening in late October when everything changed. Carmen had been asked to stay late to deep clean the academy's library, which meant they wouldn't leave until almost 9 o'clock. The building was completely empty except for them, and the silence felt different than usual, heavier, more mysterious. "I'll be in the library for at least 2 hours, Mia," Carmen said, handing Maria a sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil. "Do your homework in the main hallway where I can check on you. And remember ... Stay quiet, stay close, don't touch anything," Maria recited with a small smile. She had heard these words so many times they felt like a prayer. Carmen disappeared up the stairs with her cleaning cart, and Maria settled into her usual spot with her math homework. But tonight, the building felt alive in a way she had never noticed before. Without the constant flow of students and teachers, she could hear things she had missed. The way her footsteps echoed differently in each hallway, the soft humming of the heating system, and most importantly, the complete silence from the recital hall. The grand piano sat alone in the dark room. Waiting. Maria tried to focus on her multiplication problems, but her eyes kept drifting toward the recital hall. Doors, they were always kept open during the day, but now they stood slightly ajar, like an invitation. She could see just a sliver of the piano's black surface gleaming in the dim light from the hallway. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Maria's homework lay forgotten on her lap as she stared at those doors. The building was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Somewhere upstairs, a vacuum cleaner started humming as her mother began her work. Before she could talk herself out of it, Maria stood up. Her legs felt shaky as she walked toward the recital hall, each step echoing in the empty corridor. She paused at the doors, listening for any sound that might mean someone else was in the building. Nothing. She pushed the door open. Just enough to slip inside. The recital hall was magnificent in the darkness. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, casting silver patterns on the polished floor. The piano seemed even larger and more beautiful than usual, like a sleeping giant waiting to be awakened. Maria had never been this close to it before. During the day, there were always students or teachers around, and she had learned to admire it only from a distance. Now, she was alone with her dream. Maria approached the piano slowly, almost like she was approaching a wild animal that might run away if she moved too fast. The bench was higher than she expected, and she had to climb up onto it carefully. Her feet dangled in the air, nowhere near the pedals that the older students used. For a long moment she just sat there, staring at the keys. They were so perfectly white and black, arranged in a pattern that somehow made sense even though she had never touched a real piano before. Her cardboard keyboard had helped her memorize which key was which letter, but these keys looked different, more inviting, more alive. Maria lifted her right hand and gently pressed middle C. The note rang out pure and clear, filling the entire room with its vibration. She gasped and pulled her hand back as if the key had been hot. The sound was so much richer and more beautiful than anything she had imagined. It seemed to hang in the air for several seconds before fading away. She looked toward the door, making sure no one had heard. The building remained silent except for the distant vacuum cleaner upstairs. Feeling braver, Maria pressed the key again, this time holding it longer and listening to how the note changed as it faded. Then she tried the key next to it, D, then E. Each note was like a small miracle, a tiny piece of the magic she had been dreaming about for months, remembering the finger numbers from the beginner's book. Maria placed her right thumb on middle C and her other fingers on the next 4 white keys. She pressed them one at a time, C, D, E, F, G, creating a simple scale that sounded like the beginning of a song. The notes seemed to unlock something inside her chest. Without thinking about it, she began to play the simple melody from the beginner's book that she had memorized weeks ago. Her fingers moved carefully from key to key, and suddenly the cardboard practice sessions made sense. The real piano responded to her touch in a way that made every note feel important and meaningful. Maria played the simple song 3 times, getting more confident with each repetition. The melody was basic, just a children's tune about raindrops. But hearing it come to life under her own fingers felt like performing magic, and she tried something more ambitious. She had been listening to Isabella practice a piece by Mozart for weeks, and she thought she remembered how the main melody went. Starting with just her right hand, Maria picked out the notes slowly, making mistakes and having to start over several times. But gradually, the beautiful melody she had been humming for days began to emerge from the piano. She was so absorbed playing that she didn't hear the vacuum cleaner stop upstairs. She didn't hear her mother's footsteps in the hallway, or the soft gasp when Carmen appeared in the doorway of the recital hall. Carmen stood frozen, watching her 8-year-old daughter sitting at the magnificent grand piano, her small hands moving across the keys with surprising confidence. The melody Maria was playing was recognizable, not perfect, but clearly the Mozart piece that echoed through the building every afternoon during Isabella's practice sessions. But how was this possible? Maria had never had a single piano lesson. She had never even touched a real piano before tonight. Yet here she was, not just pressing random keys, but actually making music. Carmen felt her heart beating fast, partly from fear of being caught and partly from amazement at what she was witnessing. She wanted to rush over and stop Maria before someone discovered them, but she also couldn't bring herself to interrupt something so beautiful. Maria finished the melody and sat back with a huge smile on her face. That's when she noticed her mother standing in the doorway. "Mama?" she whispered, scrambling down from the piano bench. "I'm sorry. I know I'm not supposed to touch anything, but it was so quiet and the piano was just sitting there and ... "Mia," Carmen interrupted softly, walking over to her daughter. "How did you do that? How did you know which keys to press?" Maria looked down at her feet. "I've been watching the students every day, and there was this book that someone left behind, and I memorized the pictures of where the fingers go. I made a pretend piano out of cardboard and practiced at home." Carmen knelt down so she was at eye level with her daughter. She could see the excitement and fear in Maria's eyes, excitement from finally touching a real piano, and fear that she had done something terrible. "Play it again," Carmen said quietly. "What?" "The song you were just playing. Play it again for me." Maria climbed back onto the bench, still unsure if she was in trouble. But when she started playing the Mozart melody again, she saw her mother's face change. Carmen's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. When Maria finished, Carmen applauded softly. "That was beautiful, Mia, really beautiful." "Am I in trouble?" Carmen looked around the empty recital hall, thinking about all the risks involved. If they were caught, she would lose her job immediately. If Maria damaged the expensive piano, they could never afford to pay for repairs. But watching her daughter's face light up when she played, seeing the natural way her fingers found the right keys, Carmen realized she was witnessing something special. "We have to be very, very careful," Carmen said finally. "This piano costs more money than we make in 5 years. And if anyone finds out ... I'll be super careful, Mama, I promise." Carmen sighed, knowing she was about to make a decision that could change everything. "Show me this cardboard piano you made." Over the next few nights, when Carmen had to work late, she allowed Maria to practice on the real piano for short periods. She would stand guard by the door, listening for any unexpected sounds in the building, while Maria explored the instrument that was quickly becoming the center of her world. Maria's progress was remarkable. Within 2 weeks, she had taught herself to play simple songs with both hands. She figured out how to read basic sheet music by comparing the notes on the page to the songs she already knew. Every piece of music left behind by students became a new lesson for her. The secret practice sessions became the highlight of both their days. Carmen had never seen her daughter so focused and happy, and Maria felt like she was finally speaking a language she had always known but never been able to use. Neither of them realized that their quiet evening sessions were about to be discovered by someone who would change Maria's life forever. 3 months had passed since Maria first touched the grand piano, and her secret evening practice sessions had become as natural as breathing. She had learned to play over a dozen simple pieces, and her fingers were beginning to move with the confidence of someone who truly understood the language of music. Carmen would finish her cleaning duties and then sit quietly in the back of the recital hall, watching her daughter transform cardboard dreams into real melodies. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves when you least expect it. It was a cold Tuesday morning in February when Professor Vladimir Petrov decided to arrive at the academy 2 hours earlier than usual. He had an important phone call scheduled with a music director from Vienna, and he wanted to review some documents. In his office before the building became busy with students and staff, Petrov was not a man who liked surprises. At 62 years old, he had been running the Riverside Music Academy for 15 years with strict rules and precise schedules. Every piano was tuned exactly when it should be. Every practice room was assigned according to skill level and seniority. Every student knew their place in the academy's carefully maintained hierarchy. As he walked through the empty corridors that morning, Petrov heard something that made him stop in his tracks. Music was coming from the recital hall, beautiful, delicate music that sounded like Chopin's Minute Waltz, but played with an interpretation he had never heard before. This was impossible. No students were scheduled to practice until 9 o'clock, and it was only 7:15. The building should be completely empty except for the cleaning staff, and none of them played piano. Petrov followed the sound, his polished leather shoes clicking against the marble floor. As he got closer to the recital hall, the music became clearer. Someone was playing his prized Steinway grand piano, and they were playing it well. Very well, in fact, the professor's first emotion was anger. Someone had broken into his academy and was using his most expensive instrument without permission. His second emotion was confusion, because whoever was playing clearly had serious training. The technique was advanced, the phrasing was sophisticated, and the emotional depth was remarkable. He reached the recital hall doors and peered inside carefully. What he saw made him forget to breathe for a moment. A small girl sat at the piano bench, her legs swinging freely because her feet couldn't reach the floor. She was wearing a faded purple sweater and jeans with patches on the knees. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was completely absorbed in the music flowing from her fingers. But this couldn't be right. Children didn't just walk into music academies and play Chopin, especially not children who looked like they couldn't afford a week's worth of piano lessons. Petrov watched in stunned silence as Maria finished the waltz and immediately transitioned into a Mozart sonata. Her hands moved across the keys with natural grace, and her face showed the kind of deep concentration that usually took years of training to develop. In the back corner of the hall, Carmen sat on a folding chair, listening to her daughter with tears of pride in her eyes. She was so focused on Maria's playing that she didn't notice the figure standing in the doorway. Maria was halfway through the Mozart piece when she made a small mistake and had to start the passage over. She frowned slightly, clearly frustrated with herself, then began again with even more determination. This time she played the difficult section perfectly. That's when Petrov stepped into the room. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the music like a knife. "What exactly is going on here?" Both Maria and Carmen jumped at the unexpected voice. Maria's hands flew off the keys as if they had been burned, and Carmen shot to her feet, knocking over her chair in the process. "Professor Petrov," Carmen stammered, I can explain." "I certainly hope you can," Petrov replied coldly, walking toward the piano with measured steps. "Because what I'm seeing appears to be unauthorized use of academy property by unauthorized individuals." Maria scrambled down from the piano bench and ran to her mother's side. She had never seen the academy director up close before, and his stern expression made her feel very small and very afraid. "Sir, please don't be angry with my daughter," Carmen said quickly. "She wasn't hurting anything, she's just ... She loves music so much and ... Your daughter?" Petrov interrupted, looking from Carmen to Maria with surprise. "You're the evening cleaning woman, aren't you?" "Yes, sir. Carmen Santos, and this is my daughter Maria." Petrov turned his attention to Maria, studying her with the same intensity he usually reserved for examining musical scores. "How old are you, child?" 8, Maria whispered, not daring to look up at him. 8, Petrov repeated slowly. "And where did you learn to play Chopin and Mozart?" Maria glanced at her mother, unsure whether she should answer. Carmen nodded encouragingly. I taught myself," Maria said quietly. "I listened to the students practice every day, and I found some music books, and I made a pretend piano at home to practice on." Petrov's eyebrows rose slightly. "You taught yourself? No lessons? No formal instruction?" "No, sir." For a long moment the recital hall was completely silent. Petrov walked over to the piano and looked at the keys as if checking for damage. Then he looked back at Maria. "Play something," he said suddenly. "What?" both Maria and Carmen said at the same time. "I want to hear you play something simple." Maria looked at her mother, who nodded uncertainly. With trembling hands Maria climbed back onto the piano bench. She chose one of the first pieces she had learned, a gentle batch invention that always made her feel calm. As the music filled the room, Petrov's expression gradually changed. The anger faded from his face, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. He had been teaching music for over 30 years, and he had worked with hundreds of talented students. But he had never heard an 8-year-old play with such natural musicality and emotional understanding. When Maria finished, she sat with her hands folded in her lap, waiting for whatever punishment was coming. "Remarkable," Petrov said quietly, almost to himself. Then louder, "How long have you been doing this?" 3 months, Carmen answered for her daughter. "Only when I have to work late and only when the building is empty." "She's never damaged anything, Professor. I've been very careful to watch her." Petrov walked around the piano, thinking. Part of him was impressed by what he had witnessed. The child clearly had extraordinary natural talent, the kind that appeared maybe once in a generation. But another part of him was concerned about liability, about proper procedures, about maintaining the Academy's reputation and standards. "This cannot continue," he said finally, and Carmen's heart sank. "This is a prestigious institution, not a playground. We have insurance policies, safety regulations, and a responsibility to our paying families." "Please, Professor," Carmen pleaded, "don't let this cost me my job. I need this work. It's just, Maria loves music so much and she's never had the chance to—" "Mrs. Santos," Petrov interrupted, "I understand your daughter's enthusiasm. But what you're asking is impossible. The Academy has rules for a reason. Our instruments are worth more than most people make in a year. Our reputation depends on maintaining proper standards and procedures." Maria felt tears starting to build behind her eyes. She had known this moment would come eventually, but she had hoped it would be later, after she had learned more songs, after she had gotten better. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Something in her voice made Petrov pause. He looked at the small girl sitting at his magnificent piano, and for a moment he remembered why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about rules or procedures or maintaining proper standards. It was about the magic that happened when human emotion connected with organized sound to create something beautiful, but the Academy had policies for a reason, and he had a responsibility to protect both the institution and his students. "I'm afraid this arrangement must end," he said firmly. "Mrs. Santos, you may continue your cleaning duties, but your daughter may not touch any of the instruments. Is that understood?" Carmen nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Good, now I have work to do. Please ensure this doesn't happen again." As Petrov walked toward the door, Maria called out softly, "Professor?" He turned back. "Thank you for letting me play one last time." Petrov paused in the doorway, Maria's words echoing in his mind. One last time. For a moment he almost reconsidered his decision. But then he remembered his responsibilities, straightened his shoulders, and walked away. Neither Maria nor Carmen spoke as they gathered their things. The magic of the past 3 months was over, and both of them felt the weight of returning to a world where beautiful dreams were luxuries they couldn't afford. But sometimes the most important people enter our lives in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes forbidden talent finds a path to flourish despite every obstacle in its way. Miss Chen had been sitting in her car in the Academy parking lot for 10 minutes, trying to gather the courage to go inside. She had forgotten her lesson plans the night before and needed to retrieve them before her first student arrived. It was barely 7:30 in the morning, and she expected the building to be empty except for the cleaning staff, but as she walked through the main entrance, she heard piano music coming from the recital hall. Beautiful, sophisticated music that made her stop and listen with growing amazement. Someone was playing Chopin's Minute Waltz, with an interpretation that was both technically impressive and emotionally mature. Miss Chun had been teaching piano at the Academy for 8 years, and she knew the playing style of every advanced student. This wasn't any of them. The technique was polished, but there was something raw and honest about the performance that was different from her formally trained students, Curious, she moved quietly toward the recital hall, staying in the shadows of the corridor. What she saw through the doorway made her gasp softly. A small girl sat at the grand piano, completely absorbed in the music flowing from her fingers. Her clothes were simple and worn, and her legs dangled from the bench because she was too short to reach the floor. In the back of the room, a woman Miss Chun recognized as one of the cleaning staff sat listening with tears in her eyes. Miss Chun watched in fascination as the little girl finished the Chopin piece and moved seamlessly into a Mozart sonata. The child's musical understanding was remarkable. She shaped phrases like someone who had been studying music for years, not like a beginner stumbling through simple exercises. Then everything changed. Professor Petrov's voice cut through the music like ice, and Miss Chun watched the confrontation unfold with a growing sense of sadness and frustration. She saw the fear in the little girl's eyes when she was discovered. She heard the mother's desperate pleas to keep her job. And she witnessed Petrov's cold dismissal of what was clearly extraordinary talent when the professor walked away. Leaving the mother and daughter to collect themselves in devastated silence, Miss Chun felt her heart breaking. She had entered the music world because she believed in the transformative power of music education. She had seen how learning piano could change a child's life, building confidence, discipline, and emotional expression. But she had also seen how the music world could be exclusive and elitist, shutting out those who couldn't afford the luxury. A formal training. Miss Chun stayed hidden until the cleaning woman and her daughter left the recital hall. Then she sat alone in the corridor, thinking about what she had witnessed and what, if anything, she could do about it for the rest of that day. Miss Chun couldn't concentrate on her regular lessons. She kept thinking about the little girl's hands moving across the keys with such natural grace. She thought about the sophisticated musical choices the child had made, the subtle tempo changes, the careful attention to dynamics, the emotional depth that couldn't be taught from a textbook. That evening, Miss Chun did something she had never done before. She stayed late at the academy, waiting in an empty practice room until she heard the sounds of cleaning equipment in the hallways. Then she walked casually toward the area where she knew the cleaning staff would be working. She found Carmen emptying trash cans in the second-floor practice rooms, moving efficiently but quietly through her duties. "Excuse me," Miss Chun said, softly, not wanting to startle her. "I'm Miss Chun, one of the piano teachers here." Carmen looked up with worry in her eyes. "Yes, miss. Is there something wrong?" "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about your daughter." Carmen's face went pale. "Professor Petrov said we can't use the piano anymore." "We understand. It won't happen again." "I know what Professor Petrov said," Miss Chun replied gently. "But I also heard your daughter playing this morning. She's remarkably talented." "She loves music more than anything in the world," Carmen said quietly. "But we can't afford lessons, and now ... What if I told you there might be another way?" Carmen looked at her suspiciously. "What do you mean?" Miss Chun had been thinking about this all day, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. "Your daughter has natural ability that I've rarely seen in 20 years of teaching. It would be a tragedy to let that talent go undeveloped." But Professor Petrov made it very clear ... "Professor Petrov doesn't need to know everything that happens in this building," Miss Chun said carefully. "I often stay late to practice on the older pianos in the basement practice rooms. They're not as grand as the Steinway upstairs, but they're perfectly good instruments." Carmen stared at her, not daring to hope. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying that if a little girl happened to be in the building while her mother was working, and if she happened to wander into a practice room where I was working on my own playing, and if she happened to be curious about piano technique, well, there wouldn't be anything wrong with answering her questions, would there?" That Friday evening, Maria found herself sitting on a small bench next to Miss Chen in practice room 12, a cozy space in the basement with an upright piano that had been donated by a former student's family. It wasn't as magnificent as the grand piano upstairs, but to Maria, it might as well have been made of gold. "Show me how you learn to play," Miss Chun said simply. Maria was nervous at first. She had never had a real teacher before, and she was afraid of making mistakes. But Miss Chen's warm smile and encouraging nods helped her relax. She played the same batch invention she had performed for Professor Petrov, trying to remember exactly how she had figured out the fingering and phrasing. When she finished, Miss Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Maria, how did you know to slow down during that middle section?" "It sounded sad to me," Maria answered honestly. "Like someone missing their family? So I thought it should go slower to let people feel the sadness," Miss Chun smiled. This was exactly what she had hoped to hear. The child wasn't just playing notes on a page, she was interpreting music, understanding it emotionally, and translating that understanding into sound. "Let me show you a few things that might help," Miss Chun said, sliding onto the bench next. To Maria, over the next hour, Miss Chun taught Maria about proper hand position, about how to use her wrist and arm to create different sounds, and about reading music more efficiently. But mostly, she listened to Maria's natural instincts and helped her refine them rather than replace them. Their secret lessons became a weekly routine. Every Friday when Carmen worked late, Maria would slip down to practice room 12 where Miss Chen would be waiting with new pieces to explore and new techniques to learn. Miss Chen was amazed by how quickly Maria absorbed everything she taught her. The child was like a sponge, soaking up musical knowledge and applying it immediately. "You have what we call a musical mind," Miss Chen explained one evening as they worked on a Beethoven sonatina. "You don't just play the notes, you understand what the composer was trying to say." "How do you know what the composer was trying to say?" Maria asked. "The same way you knew that batch invention was sad. You listen with your heart, not just your ears." As weeks turned into months, Maria's playing improved dramatically. Miss Chin introduced her to music theory, teaching her about scales and chord progressions and how different keys created different emotions. She showed Maria how to practice efficiently, how to work through difficult passages, and how to memorize pieces properly. But more than technical skills, Miss Chun helped Maria develop her natural musical instincts. She encouraged the child to experiment with different interpretations, to trust her emotional reactions to the music, and to find her own voice as a pianist. "Every great musician brings something unique to their performance," Miss Chun told her. "Your job isn't to play exactly like someone else. Your job is to find the truth in the music and share it in your own way." Maria treasured these lessons more than anything in her life. For 1 hour each week, she felt like a real piano student. Instead of just a girl who cleaned buildings with her mother, Miss Chun treated her ideas seriously, answered all her questions patiently, and gradually introduced her to more challenging pieces. By the end of their first year together, Maria was playing intermediate-level repertoire with confidence and artistry that impressed even Miss Chun. The child had progressed faster than students who had been taking lessons for 3 or 4 years, but their secret arrangement wasn't without challenges. They had to be constantly careful about noise levels in the basement practice room. They had to coordinate their schedules around Carmen's work duties and Miss Chun's regular teaching obligations. And they lived with the constant fear that someone would discover their unauthorized lessons, and both Carmen and Miss Chun would face serious consequences. Still, Miss Chen had no regrets about her decision to help Maria. Watching the child's talent develop was one of the most rewarding experiences of her teaching career. She saw in Maria the kind of pure musical passion that had drawn her to music in the first place, the joy of discovery, the excitement of mastering a challenging piece, the deep satisfaction of expressing emotions through organized sound. As their second year of secret lessons began, Miss Chen started to realize that Maria's talent was even more special than she had initially thought. 2 years had passed since Miss Chen first discovered Maria playing in the recital hall, and their secret Friday evening lessons had transformed the 10-year-old into a remarkable pianist. What had started as basic technique work had evolved into sophisticated musical interpretation that surprised even Miss Chun with its depth and maturity. Maria could now play pieces that challenged high school students. Her small hands had learned to navigate complex passages with confidence, and her musical understanding had grown far beyond her years. But their secret arrangement was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The problem was that Maria was simply getting too good to hide. During her regular daytime visits to the academy with her mother, Maria would sometimes unconsciously hum complex melodies she had learned in her lessons. When students practiced pieces she knew, she would unconsciously move her fingers as if playing along. Miss Chin had noticed other faculty members giving Maria curious looks, wondering how a cleaning woman's daughter seemed so familiar with advanced classical music. It was on a gray Monday morning in March that everything changed. Miss Chin was organizing her teaching materials when she overheard a conversation between Professor Petrov and Mrs. Patterson in the main office. "The annual scholarship competition will be held in 6 weeks," Petrov was saying. "We need to finalize the application requirements and send out the announcements." Miss Chun paused in her work, listening more carefully. "How much is the scholarship worth this year?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Full tuition for 2 years, plus access to private lessons with our master teachers. It's worth nearly $20,000. The winner will also have the opportunity to perform with the City Youth Orchestra." "That should attract some serious talent," Mrs. Patterson replied. "Are we opening it to students from other academies?" "Again? Yes, but only for ages 10 to 12. We want to identify and nurture exceptional young talent in the region." Miss Chin felt her heart start beating faster. A full scholarship, access to master teachers, performance opportunities. Everything that Maria needed but could never afford. After the conversation ended, Miss Chen sat alone in her practice room, thinking about what she had heard. The scholarship competition was exactly what Maria needed, a chance to receive proper training and recognition for her extraordinary talent. But entering her would require revealing their secret lessons and putting both their positions at the academy at risk. More troubling, Miss Chun knew the kind of students who typically won these competitions. They came from wealthy families who had invested tens of thousands of dollars in private lessons, summer music camps, and performance opportunities. They owned expensive instruments and wore designer clothes to their auditions. They had been groomed for success from early childhood. Maria, on the other hand, had learned to play on whatever instruments she could access secretly. She had never performed for an audience or competed against other musicians. Her only formal training consisted of 2 years of hidden Friday evening lessons, but Miss Chen also knew something the competition judges would discover if they gave Maria a chance. Raw talent and genuine musical passion were more powerful than any amount of money or privilege. That Friday evening, Miss Chin broached the subject carefully during Maria's lesson. "Maria, how do you feel about your playing these days?" she asked as they worked on a Chopin nocturne. "I love it more every week," Maria replied honestly. "Sometimes I dream about the music, and when I wake up, I can hear exactly how I want to play it. Do you think you're ready for a bigger challenge?" Maria looked up from the piano keys, curious. "What kind of challenge?" Miss Chun took a deep breath. "There's a scholarship competition coming up in 6 weeks. The winner receives free lessons and the chance to perform with professional musicians." Maria's eyes widened. "Really? That sounds amazing. Do you think any of your students will enter?" "Actually, I was thinking about you." "Me?" Maria laughed nervously. "But I'm not a real student. I'm just someone who sneaks around practicing in the basement." "Maria, listen to me," Miss Chun said. "Seriously, you play better than students who have been taking lessons for 5 years. You understand music in a way that can't be taught. You have a gift. But what about Professor Petrov? What about the rules? If anyone finds out about our lessons?" Miss Chen had been wrestling with these same concerns for weeks. There would be risks, she admitted. But there would also be an incredible opportunity. This scholarship could change your entire life. Maria was quiet for a long moment, her hands resting on the piano keys. "What would I have to do?" "First, you would need to prepare 3 pieces, one from the Baroque period, one classical, and one romantic. You'd have to perform them for a panel of judges, along with other young pianists from across the region." "How many other pianists?" "Usually about 30 or 40. Maria felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. She had never played for anyone except Miss Chun and her mother. The thought of performing in front of judges and competing against formally trained students was both exciting and terrifying. "Do you really think I could win?" she asked quietly. "I think you have as good a chance as anyone," Miss Chun replied. "But more importantly, I think you deserve the chance to try." Over the next few days, Miss Chun couldn't stop thinking about the competition. She researched the requirements, studied the judging criteria, and even attended a few of the preliminary auditions to understand what Maria would be facing. What she saw both encouraged and worried her. The level of technical skill among the young competitors was impressive, but many of them played with a mechanical precision that lacked emotional depth. They had been trained to play correctly, but not necessarily to play meaningfully. Maria, on the other hand, brought something unique to every piece she played. She found stories in the music that even Miss Chun hadn't noticed. She played with a sincerity and passion that was impossible to fake, but Miss Chun also noticed the obvious advantages the other competitors had. They played on expensive instruments that had been perfectly maintained. They wore formal concert attire that had been tailored specifically for performances. Their parents sat in the audience with professional cameras, documenting every moment of their children's musical journey. The following Friday, Miss Chun made her decision. "I'm going to enter you in the scholarship competition," she told Maria as they began their lesson. "Are you sure?" Maria asked, her voice shaking slightly. Sure, but Maria, this means we have to work harder than we've ever worked before. We have 6 weeks to prepare 3 pieces that will showcase your abilities. And we have to do it without anyone discovering what we're doing." For the next month and a half, their Friday evening lessons became intense preparation sessions. Miss Chun helped Maria select pieces that would highlight her strengths. Bach's Italian Concerto for the Baroque requirement, Mozart's Sonata in C major for the classical piece, and Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major for the romantic selection. Each piece presented its own challenges. The Bach required precise fingerwork and clear articulation of multiple musical lines. The Mozart demanded classical elegance and perfect timing. The Chopin needed emotional maturity and sophisticated use of the piano's dynamic range. Maria threw herself into the preparation with determination that amazed Miss Chun. She practiced the pieces in her head during the day, visualizing her fingers on the keys and hearing the music in her mind. She asked detailed questions about historical performance practices and stylistic requirements. Why did Chopin write so many pieces in flat keys? Maria asked one evening as they worked on the Nocturne. He said flat keys sounded warmer and more intimate on the piano, Miss Chun explained. Sharp keys were more brilliant, but flat keys were more emotional. "I can hear that," Maria said thoughtfully. "This piece feels like someone telling a secret." Comments like these reminded Miss Chun why she had decided to take the risk of entering Maria in the competition. The child had an intuitive understanding of music that couldn't be learned from textbooks or developed through repetition. She connected with the emotional core of each piece in a way that made her performances uniquely compelling. As the competition date approached, Miss Chun helped Maria with more than just musical preparation. She found a simple but elegant black dress at a secondhand store and had it altered to fit Maria perfectly. She taught her how to walk on stage confidently, how to bow to the judges, and how to handle the nervousness that came with performing. "Remember," Miss Ching told her during their final practice session, "you belong on that stage just as much as anyone else. Your music is just as valid and just as beautiful as theirs." The night before the competition, Miss Chun submitted Maria's entry form with trembling hands. She had listed herself as Maria's teacher, knowing this would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. But she had also included a recording of Maria playing the Chopin Nocturne, because she knew that once the judges heard her play, questions about her background would become secondary to the undeniable beauty of her music. As she walked home that evening, Miss Chun felt the weight of what she had set in motion. In less than 24 hours, Maria would step onto a stage and reveal the secret they had been keeping for 2 years. Everything would change after that performance. The morning of the competition dawned gray and drizzly. matching the nervous flutter in Maria's stomach as she stood in front of the small mirror in their apartment bathroom. Carmen had braided her daughter's hair into a neat bun and helped her into the black dress Miss Chun had found at the second-hand store. The dress fit perfectly now after the alterations, but Maria still felt like she was playing dress-up. "You look beautiful, Mia," Carmen said softly, adjusting the collar of the dress. But Maria could see the worry in her mother's eyes. They both knew what they were walking into today. "What if they ask questions about my lessons?" Maria whispered. "What if someone recognizes us from the academy?" Carmen knelt down to Maria's eye level. "Then we tell the truth. Miss Chen is a wonderful teacher, and you've worked harder than any student I've ever seen. You deserve to be there." But even Carmen's encouraging words couldn't hide the fact that they were about to enter a world where they didn't belong. The other competitors would arrive in expensive cars with their families, carrying professional quality sheet music in leather portfolios. Maria had her 3 pieces tucked into a worn folder that Carmen had bought at the dollar store. They took 2 buses to reach the Riverside Music Academy, arriving 30 minutes before Maria's scheduled performance time. The building looked different on competition day, with official banners hanging from the entrance and several news vans parked outside. Apparently, the annual scholarship competition was considered newsworthy enough to warrant local media coverage. Inside, the academy buzzed with activity. Parents in designer clothing clustered in the lobby, discussing their children's preparations and comparing notes about private teachers and summer music programs. Children Maria's age sat with perfect posture, some practicing finger exercises in the air, others reviewing their sheet music with intense concentration. Maria and Carmen found 2 empty chairs near the back of the lobby and sat quietly, trying to blend into the background. But it was immediately obvious that they were different from everyone else there. "Look at that dress," Maria heard a woman whisper to her friend. "It looks like it came from a thrift store." "And those shoes," the friend replied. "I can't believe they let just anyone enter this competition." Maria looked down at her black flats, which Carmen had polished until they shone, but which were clearly several years old and well-worn. Around her, the other girls wore brand-new patent leather shoes that probably cost more than Carmen made in a week. A boy about Maria's age walked past with his mother, both of them carrying expensive leather music bags. "I can't believe I have to compete against amateurs," the boy said loudly enough for Maria to hear. "This should be for serious musicians only." His mother glanced over at Maria and Carmen, then said something quietly that made the boy laugh. Maria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. "Maybe we should leave," she whispered to her mother. "I don't belong here." But before Carmen could respond, Miss Chen appeared beside them. She was dressed professionally in a navy blazer and carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew she belonged in these surroundings. "Maria, you look perfect," Miss Chen said warmly. "Are you ready?" "I'm scared," Maria admitted quietly. "Everyone here seems so much more prepared than me." Miss Chen sat down next to Maria and spoke in a low voice that only she and Carmen could hear. "Let me tell you something about competitions. Half of winning is confidence, and confidence comes from knowing you've done the work. You've practiced harder than any student I've ever taught. You understand these pieces better than most adults understand them. The only difference between you and these other students is that their families have more money. But what if I make mistakes? Then you keep playing and finish strong?" "Every performer makes mistakes, Maria. The great ones just don't let the mistakes stop them." Mrs. Patterson's voice echoed through the lobby as she announced that the competition would begin in 15 minutes. Competitors were called to sign in and receive their performance order. Maria's hands shook slightly as she wrote her name on the sign-in sheet. She was number 27 out of 32 competitors, which meant she would perform near the end. Miss Chen had explained that this could be an advantage, since the judges would be warmed up and more likely to remember a standout performance. As they waited for Maria's turn, they watched several other competitors perform through the partially open doors of the recital hall. The level of technical skill was impressive, but Miss Chen noticed what she had hoped she would notice. Most of the performances were mechanically perfect but emotionally empty. They play all the right notes, she whispered to Carmen, but they're not telling any stories. One girl played Mozart with machine-like precision, hitting every note cleanly but without any sense of the playfulness and joy that made Mozart special. A boy performed a Bach invention flawlessly but missed all the intricate conversations between the musical voices that made Bach so fascinating. When competitor number 26 finished her performance, Mrs. Patterson called out, "Number 27? Maria Santos." Maria's legs felt like water as she stood up. The lobby had filled with parents and family members of competitors who had already performed, and she could feel dozens of eyes watching her as she walked toward the recital hall doors. "The cleaning lady's daughter," she heard someone whisper. Behind her, "What is she even doing here?" another voice added. "This should be interesting," a third person said with obvious sarcasm. Maria paused at the entrance to the recital hall, her confidence crumbling under the weight of their judgment. She turned back to look at her mother and Miss Chun, who were both watching her with encouraging smiles that couldn't quite hide their own nervousness. Inside the recital hall, the atmosphere was formal and intimidating. 5 judges sat at a long table in the front row, their clipboards and evaluation forms spread before them. The magnificent Steinway grand piano, the same instrument where her musical journey had begun, waited on the stage under bright spotlights, scattered throughout. The audience were parents, academy faculty members, and local music enthusiasts who attended the competition every year. Many of them were already whispering to each other about the unexpected competitor who looked so different from the others. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Patterson announced, "our next performer is Maria Santos, age 10, performing Bach's Italian Concerto, Mozart's Sonata in C major, and Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major." A murmur went through the audience. Those were challenging pieces for any 10-year-old, but especially surprising coming from someone who clearly wasn't from the usual wealthy background of competition winners. Maria walked across the stage toward the piano, her footsteps echoing in the large room. She could hear fragments of whispered conversations from the audience. "Who is her teacher? I've never seen her at any of the regional competitions. Those pieces are far too advanced for someone her age. This is probably a waste of time." As Maria approached the piano bench, she saw Professor Petrov sitting in the third row, his face a mask of surprise and confusion. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw recognition dawn in his expression. He knew exactly who she was and how she had learned to play. Maria sat down at the piano bench and adjusted its height, trying to ignore the whispers and stares from the audience. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them in her lap and took a deep breath. In the back of the room, Carmen had tears in her eyes as she watched her daughter prepare to perform. Next to her, Miss Chun held her breath, knowing that everything they had worked for over the past 2 years was about to be revealed. For a moment, the recital hall fell silent except for the sound of Maria's nervous breathing. She looked out at the sea of skeptical faces, feeling the weight of their low expectations and obvious prejudice. Then she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The opening notes of Bach's Italian Concerto filled the room with a clarity and confidence that immediately silenced every whisper. Maria's small hands moved across the keyboard with perfect precision, but more importantly, they moved with understanding and intention. This wasn't just a 10-year-old playing difficult music. This was a true musician sharing a story that she understood completely, note by note, phrase by phrase, emotion by emotion. The transformation in the room was immediate and startling. Skeptical expressions changed to surprise, then to amazement, then to something approaching awe. The judges leaned forward in their chairs, their clipboards forgotten, as they listened to something they had never expected to hear. The first notes of Bach's Italian Concerto rang out clear and confident, cutting through the skeptical murmurs like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Maria's small hands moved across the keys with a precision that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. But it wasn't just the technical accuracy that captured their attention, it was the way she made the music breathe and speak. In the back row, Carmen gripped the edge of her seat, hardly daring to breathe. She had heard Maria practice this piece dozens of times in their tiny apartment, humming along while doing dishes or folding laundry. But hearing it on the magnificent Steinway grand piano, with the acoustics of the recital hall carrying every note to perfection, was like discovering her daughter all over again. Miss Chen watched with tears already forming in her eyes. She knew. Every phrase Maria was playing had guided her through every difficult passage during their secret Friday lessons. But tonight, Maria was taking the music to places they had never explored together. The child was finding new meanings in the familiar melodies, making choices that showed deep musical understanding. The batch piece required Maria to play multiple musical lines at the same time, making it sound like a conversation between different instruments. Her left hand provided a steady, driving rhythm while her right hand danced through elaborate melodies that seemed to sparkle in the bright stage lights. What amazed the audience was how clearly they could hear each separate voice. Even though all the sounds were coming from one small girl at one piano. About halfway through the piece, something magical happened. The whispers and rustling in the audience stopped completely. Even the most skeptical listeners found themselves caught up in the beauty of what they were hearing. This wasn't a child showing off for adults. This was a real musician sharing something deeply personal and beautiful. Professor Petrov sat in stunned silence, his mind racing. How was this possible? The last time he had seen this child, she was forbidden from touching any piano in his academy. Now she was performing at a level that surpassed most of his advanced students. Where had she learned to play like this? Who had been teaching her? When Maria finished the batch piece, the room was completely silent for several seconds. Then, almost against their will, people began to applaud. It started slowly, uncertainly, as if the audience wasn't sure what they had just witnessed. But as the clapping grew louder and more enthusiastic, Maria felt a small smile cross her face for the first time since stepping onto the stage. "Thank you," she said simply into the microphone, her voice smaller but steadier than it had been when she first walked out. "Now I'll play Mozart's Sonata in C major." The Mozart piece was completely different from the batch, where the Italian concerto had been complex and conversational. The Mozart was elegant and playful. It required a lighter touch, more delicate phrasing, and perfect timing. Maria's hands seemed to float across the keys, creating sounds that bubbled and sparkled like champagne. One of the judges, Dr. Catherine Rivers, found herself leaning forward in her chair. She had been judging piano competitions for 15 years and had heard thousands of young musicians perform this particular Mozart sonata. Most of them played it correctly, but without understanding what made Mozart special. They focused on hitting the right notes at the right time, but missed the humor, the wit, the pure joy that Mozart had written into the music. Maria somehow understood all of it. When the melody called for playfulness, her touch became light and dancing. When Mozart wrote in a moment of unexpected tenderness, Maria's phrasing became gentle and warm. She wasn't just playing notes on a page, she was having a conversation with Mozart himself. Across the centuries. In the audience, parents who had arrived expecting to see their own children win scholarships found themselves completely absorbed in Maria's performance. The woman who had earlier commented on Maria's dress was now watching with her mouth slightly open, amazed by what she was hearing. The boy who had complained about competing against amateurs sat with his arms crossed, his confidence shaken by the realization that Maria played better than he did. As Maria moved through the Mozart sonata, her confidence grew with each phrase. The piano felt like an extension of her own voice, responding to her thoughts and emotions in ways that still amazed her. She remembered Miss Chen's words about letting the music tell its own story, and tonight the story was coming through more clearly than ever before. The Mozart ended with a flourish of rapid scales that Maria executed flawlessly, her fingers flying across the keys in perfect coordination. The applause this time was immediate and enthusiastic, with several people in the audience nodding to each other in approval, but Maria knew the real test was still coming. The Chopin Nocturne was the most emotionally demanding piece in her program, and it would require her to show not just technical skill, but artistic maturity. "My final piece," Maria announced, "is Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major." The opening notes of the nocturne floated through the room like a whispered secret. This piece was about longing, about beauty that was almost too intense to bear, about emotions that couldn't be expressed in words. Maria had connected with it immediately when Miss Chun first played it for her. And tonight, all of her feelings about music, about dreams, about the long journey that had brought her to this stage, poured into every note her right hand sang. The main melody with a tenderness that made several audience members close their eyes, while her left hand provided rich, rolling accompaniment that seemed to embrace the melody like a gentle hug. When Chopin wrote moments of passionate intensity, Maria's playing became more urgent, more dramatic. When the music called for quiet reflection, her touch became so soft that people held their breath to hear every note. Carmen found tears streaming down her face as she listened to her daughter play. This was the same little girl who used to hum melodies while helping with laundry, who had practiced on cardboard keyboards because they couldn't afford a real piano. Now she was creating beauty that filled an entire concert hall, touching the hearts of people who had never even noticed her before. Miss Chun was crying too, overwhelmed by pride and amazement. In 2 years of secret lessons, she had watched Maria grow from a curious child into a true artist. But tonight, Maria was surpassing even Miss Chen's highest expectations. The performance was more than technically perfect. It was emotionally profound. The middle section of the nocturne included some of the most technically challenging passages Maria had ever learned. Her hands had to stretch across wide intervals, while maintaining perfect legato phrasing. Rapid ornamental figures had to sparkle and dance without disturbing the underlying emotional flow. 2 years ago, these passages would have been impossible for her small hands. Tonight, she played them as if they were the most natural thing in the world. As Maria approached the final section of the nocturne, something extraordinary happened in the recital hall. The audience wasn't just listening anymore, they were experiencing something transformative. People who had come expecting a routine competition were witnessing the birth of a real artist. Professor Petrov sat with his head in his hands, overwhelmed by what he was hearing and by his own role in trying to prevent it. This child, whom he had dismissed and forbidden from touching his pianos, possessed a musical gift that was rarer than he had encountered in 30 years of teaching. The nocturne built to its emotional climax, with Maria playing cascading arpeggios that seemed to shimmer in the concert hall's perfect acoustics. Her face showed the deep concentration of someone completely absorbed in the music, but also the joy of someone doing exactly what they were meant to do. As the final notes faded into silence, the recital hall remained completely quiet for what felt like an eternity. Maria sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, hardly believing that she had just performed 3 of the most challenging pieces in her repertoire, without a single major mistake. Then Dr. Rivers, the head judge, began to stand up from her seat. She was followed by the other judges, then by audience members throughout the hall. One by one, the entire room rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Maria looked out at the sea of applauding faces, the same faces that had looked at her with skepticism and condescension just 30 minutes earlier. Now they were on their feet, celebrating her music, acknowledging her talent, recognizing her as a true musician. In the back of the room, Carmen and Miss Chen were both crying and applauding, overwhelmed by what they had just witnessed. Their secret was out now, their risk had been taken, and the result was more beautiful than either of them had dared to hope. As Maria stood up from the piano bench and took her bow, she caught sight of Professor Petrov in the audience. The stern director who had forbidden her from touching his instruments was now standing and applauding with everyone else, tears visible on his cheeks. In that moment, Maria realized that everything had changed. She was no longer the cleaning lady's daughter who wasn't supposed to touch the pianos. She was a pianist, a musician, an artist who had just given the performance of her life. The applause continued for several more minutes, and Maria found herself smiling wider than she had ever smiled before. Whatever happened next, she knew that this moment. The standing ovation seemed to last forever, but eventually the applause began to fade and people slowly returned to their seats. Maria remained on stage, still trying to process what had just happened. 3 months ago, she had been practicing on cardboard keyboards in her bedroom. Tonight, she had just performed in front of the most important people in the regional music community, and they were treating her like a real musician. Mrs. Patterson approached the microphone to announce that there would be a 20-minute break while the judges deliberated. The audience began filing out to the lobby, buzzing with excitement about what they had just witnessed. But many people lingered, hoping to catch another glimpse of the remarkable young pianist who had just turned their expectations upside down. As Maria walked off stage, she was immediately surrounded by people wanting to congratulate her. Parents who had barely acknowledged her existence an hour earlier were now shaking her hand and asking about her musical background. Other competitors approached with expressions of genuine admiration, suddenly seeing her as a peer rather than an outsider. "That was incredible," said a girl named Rebecca, who had performed earlier in the evening. "Where do you study?" "I've never heard anyone our age play Chopin like that." Before Maria could answer, Miss Chun appeared at her side gently, guiding her away from the crowd. "She needs a few minutes to breathe," Miss Chun told the gathering admirers politely but firmly. They found a quiet corner near the back of the lobby where Carmen was waiting with tears still glistening in her eyes. The moment Maria reached her, "Mother," Carmen wrapped her in the tightest hug of her life. "Mia, I am so proud of you I can barely speak," Carmen whispered into her daughter's ear. "You were magnificent up there. Absolutely magnificent." "I can't believe I actually did it," Maria said, her voice shaking with leftover adrenaline. "I can't believe I played all 3 pieces without any major mistakes." "You did more than avoid mistakes," Miss Chun said softly. "You created something beautiful. You told stories with that music that I've never heard told quite that way before." As they talked quietly in their corner, Maria noticed a distinguished older man approaching them. He was tall and silver-haired, wearing an expensive-looking dark suit, and he walked with the confidence of someone accustomed to being recognized. Several people in the lobby turned to watch him as he made his way over to their small group. "Excuse me," the man said with a slight accent that sounded European. "I am hoping to speak with the young lady who just performed." Miss Chen recognized him immediately and felt her heart skip a beat. This was Maestro Antonio Castellano, one of the most celebrated pianists in the world. He had won major international competitions, performed with the world's greatest orchestras, and taught at the most prestigious music schools in Europe and America. What was he doing at a regional youth competition? "I am Maestro Castellano," he said, extending his hand to Maria. "I was invited to serve as a guest judge for today's competition, and I wanted to personally congratulate you on your performance." Maria shook his hand with trembling fingers, starstruck by the realization that a world-famous musician knew who she was. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say. "It's an honor to meet you." "The honor is mine," Maestro Castellano replied with a warm smile. "In 40 years of teaching and performing, I have rarely heard a young musician with such natural musical instinct. Your interpretation of the Chopin Nocturne was particularly remarkable. You understood things about that piece that some professional pianists never discover." Carmen and Miss Chen exchanged amazed glances. One of the world's greatest pianists was praising Maria's performance in terms usually reserved for seasoned professionals. "Tell me," Maestro Castellano continued, "who has been your teacher? Your musical education must have been quite exceptional." Miss Chen stepped forward, knowing this was the moment when their secret would be fully revealed. "I am her teacher, sir, Miss Chun from the Academy faculty." "Ah, excellent work," the maestro said approvingly. "You have clearly helped her develop remarkable artistry along with solid technique." Before Miss Chun could explain the unusual circumstances of Maria's musical education, Mrs. Patterson's voice echoed through the lobby, calling everyone back into the recital hall for the judge's announcement. As they walked back into the performance space, Maria felt her nervousness returning. The performance was over, but now came the judgment. Had she really been good enough to win the scholarship that could change her entire life? The 5 judges sat at their table, with Maestro Castellano, Taking the center seat as head judge, Mrs. Patterson stood at the microphone, holding a sealed envelope containing the results. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "this year's competition featured 32 exceptionally talented young pianists from across the region. The judges faced an extremely difficult decision." Maria felt calm and reach over and squeeze her hand tightly. However, one performance this evening stood out not only for its technical excellence, but for its extraordinary musical maturity and emotional depth. The recipient of this year's full scholarship to the Riverside Music Academy is... The pause felt like it lasted an hour. Maria Santos. The recital hall erupted in applause once again, but this time it was even louder and more enthusiastic than before. Maria sat in stunned silence, unable to believe what she had just heard. She had won. She had actually won. Carmen burst into tears of joy, pulling Maria into another crushing hug. Miss Ching was crying too, overwhelmed by pride and relief that their enormous risk had paid off so beautifully. As Maria walked back onto the stage to accept her scholarship certificate, Maestro Castellano stood up from the judges' table and began applauding. Seeing the renowned maestro on his feet, the entire audience rose once again in another thunderous standing ovation, but the surprises weren't over yet. "In addition to the scholarship," Maestro Castellano announced once the applause died down, "I would like to extend a personal invitation to Maria to attend my summer masterclass program in Vienna this July. I believe she has the potential to develop into a truly exceptional artist, and I would be honored to work with her." The audience gasped at this unexpected announcement. The maestro's summer program in Vienna was legendary, accepting only the most promising young musicians from around the world. To be invited by personal recommendation was almost unheard of. Maria felt like she was living in a dream. 6 hours ago, she had been a nervous 10-year-old afraid she didn't belong in the competition. Now she was a scholarship winner with an invitation to study with one of the world's greatest pianists. The evening wound down and people began to leave. Professor Petrov approached Maria and her family. He looked uncomfortable and somewhat embarrassed, very different from the stern authority figure who had forbidden Maria from touching his pianos 2 years earlier. "Maria," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. When I discovered you playing in the recital hall, I made a judgment based on assumptions rather than listening to what you were actually capable of. Tonight you have shown me that talent and passion are far more important than background or financial circumstances." He turned to Miss Chun. "I also owe you thanks for recognizing something special and having the courage to nurture it, even when institutional policies stood in the way." Miss Chun nodded graciously, but Maria spoke up with more confidence than she had ever shown in the professor's presence. "Thank you for saying that, Professor Petrov," she said. "But I also want to thank you for having such beautiful pianos in your academy. Even when I wasn't supposed to touch them, listening to other students play them taught me so much about music." Later that evening, as they rode the bus home through the quiet city streets, Maria sat between her mother and Miss Chun, still clutching her scholarship certificate and trying to process everything that had happened. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now you get to become the musician you were always meant to be," Miss Chun replied. "You'll have proper lessons, access to excellent instruments, and opportunities to perform with other serious musicians. And in the summer you'll go to Vienna and study with Maestro Castellano," Carmen added, still hardly believing it herself. "But most importantly," Miss Chun continued, "you've proven something tonight that goes far beyond winning a competition. You've shown that authentic talent and genuine passion for music can overcome any obstacle. You've inspired everyone who heard you play to believe in the power of music to transform lives." As their bus pulled up to their stop, Maria looked out the window at their modest neighborhood, the same streets she had walked every day, the same small apartment where she had practiced on cardboard keyboards and dreamed of touching real piano. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. Tomorrow, she would begin a new chapter of her musical journey, with opportunities she had never imagined possible. But tonight, she was still the same girl who loved music more than anything in the world, who had found a way to turn an impossible dream into beautiful reality. "Thank you," she said to Miss Chun as they walked toward their apartment building. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. Thank you for reminding me why I became a music teacher in the first place," Miss Chun replied. "Watching you grow into the artist you performed as tonight has been the greatest privilege of my